Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Break with NCBA. And this morning we have the Honorable Delegate Jon Cardin from the state of Maryland, who also happens to be an attorney and even does some work in the creditors' rights space. So good morning, Delegate Cardin.
Good morning. It's good to see you.
Thanks for joining me. Just want to ask you a couple questions about what it's like to be a lawyer in the legislature, and what about being a lawyer attracted you to run for the legislature in the first place?
Well, I guess I became a lawyer and a legislator almost at the same time. I went to law school to go to Capitol Hill and get a job on Capitol Hill. And then as I learned, I really enjoyed the law, practicing it, and helping make sure that clients and constituents were treated fairly. And so there was a seamless sort of connection between being a lawyer and representing clients and being a legislator and representing constituents. And I thought that with my skill set, it would be a really good cooperative assignment to be both a lawyer and a legislator. As it turns out, being a legislator can sometimes make being a lawyer challenging because of the time constraints, the conflicts of interest issues, and sometimes being a lawyer can hamper or make it difficult to be a legislator, because as a lawyer you try and look at things from multiple perspectives, and sometimes it's not necessarily the perspective that your team in the political world wants to take, and you have to be very graceful in how to show dissension without being a difficult person in your little political world.
Yeah, so there is a balance there. So you represent Baltimore County, a part of Baltimore County, Maryland, and sit on the Judiciary Committee, if I'm not mistaken. So the question is, how has your practice as an attorney changed or guided your perspective when dealing with court issues, or even issues in certain civil or criminal areas of the law? How is that intertwined with your view on policy and procedural issues? How do you balance those things?
Sure. So I think that as an attorney, but also as an attorney who practices some civil law, the rule of law and rules and making sure that people are following sort of the rules is really important to me, because what you find is that legislators want to generally accomplish their goals and do their things. They do their focus on their priorities. And they want to make the law mold to what they want, versus making sure that public policy adheres to the rule of law. So as an attorney, I have found that it has helped me tremendously in guiding our legislative colleagues into understanding that you can't just, for example, forgive debt without understanding that you are reducing the rights and the ability for us to make sure that a contract is upheld and contract law becomes paramount, and we want to make sure that we don't lose that insight and that ability. At the same time, I also practice criminal law and criminal defense, and I have learned that there are times when mercy and justice need to be balanced. And we need to figure out how to have a civil society without making sure that we're not providing opportunities for people who sometimes require them in order for us to move forward as a society.
And because you deal with the public, and you've like you said, you represent people in criminal matters, but you also represent companies and small businesses in creditors' rights issues like debt collection type cases. do you feel like the legislature, what's the role of the legislature and regulators when it comes to overseeing the practice of law? Is that something that should be left for the courts? Do you feel sometimes there's folks overstep their desire to control what
Are
lawyers
you leading a
do?
witness, Nathan?
I don't know. It's just a good question.
Okay, I'll start with the fact that I think that the courts should be the ones who are overseeing and refereeing the actions of attorneys. There is a role for the legislature to come up with policies that make sense and that are balanced and provide both guidance and provide an ability for consumers to be able to live and survive in our community. That being said, there needs to be a pretty broad understanding, and legislators who don't practice in this area don't necessarily understand that how important the essence of contract is to the rule of law. And to me, there has to be, people have to be able to live and survive. We should not be putting people in jail because they have a debt. At the same time, we can't forgive debt without understanding that without an understanding that if you do forgive debt, that you are diminishing the ability for our rule of law to actually function. So there has to be this understanding, there has to be this balance. And I think that is lost on many of my colleagues. At the same time, look, I love when I am in court, for example, representing a bank, for example, and I can have the authority to be able to say, we understand that there needs to be a compromise. And if we can compromise correctly, we can find that balance, everybody winds up being okay. Maybe nobody's quite thrilled, but everybody realizes that we can move forward. And that to me is something that I think colleagues on both sides don't realize, that there is that magic spot in the middle.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing is that communication is key in resolving a lot of issues, and sometimes strict interpretation of the law on either side doesn't really resolve the matter or come to something where both parties are satisfied with the outcome. So that's what I'm hearing, that compromise and communication seems to be the key for good outcomes.
I think that's very fair to say. And I'll say that, look, there are times when the law is the law and you have to fight to get a court to adhere and make a decision on that side. There are other times when there are certain hardships that are going to cause a creditor to be unable to collect. It's just the facts. But there are many instances where there is room, if we can communicate well, to be able to have both justice and mercy, and people everybody can manage.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And finally, I know we're running out of time, but are there a situation you could think of where your background and experience as an attorney was really useful on your committee or within work you did in the legislature to educate other legislators about the nature of the practice of law or law-related issues?
So I would say, number one, I'll give you 2 examples. First example, in criminal law, I do a lot of criminal law. There's not a lot of people in my committee that handle those. And for example, we were dealing with changing the probation before judgment part of the statute, or changing the driving under the influence piece of the statute. And I think that my experience and my knowledge helped guide many of my colleagues to understand why it was important to make certain changes. Another example, and more specifically with the DWI, there's a question as to whether it should be a probation before judgment on DWI should be expungible. And it's the only offense that where a probation before judgment is not expungible. And to me, from a public policy perspective, it makes no sense whatsoever. From a practical perspective, I understand that some of the folks on the other side, but in the end, it is something that I think my colleagues understand is important in terms of allowing people to be able to move on with their lives. In terms of creditors' rights, there was legislation that upended the attorney's ability to be able to present a case on student loan debt that came into the legislature. And having some experience in that, not a tremendous amount, but some experience in that, I read the legislation and it really was comprehensively untenable. It was impossible to be able, what it did is it made it impossible for the lawyer to be able to prove their case. It didn't say that the money wasn't owed. It didn't say that there wasn't a contract. It just made it so that the lawyer was unable to do the job he needed to do to represent his client. And for me to be able to explain that to my colleagues, I think helped ameliorate the situation to a certain extent.
That's a great story. And I know we're glad you're there. So thank you for doing some of the education and explaining concepts like due process under the law and equal protections and things like that, where it all has to make sense under the Constitution. So thank you so much. I hope you'll come back and join me again for another one of these coffee breaks when you have a few minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Take care.